Hello and welcome to this short video about Marxist perspectives on gender inequality. The Marxist perspective obviously is critical of capitalism. Gender inequalities are seen as a product of capitalism, and family life in terms of monogamous marriage and the nuclear family as a unit of consumption and also a unit of workers, support for workers, seen as supporting capitalists. Engels argues that before capitalism and before feudalism there was a form of primitive communism where there was shared ownership of all resources, and this would have included non-monogamous relationships. Capitalism created monogamy in order to keep property within the male line, and this is called patrilineal primogeniture. And essentially this divides men from women, it maintains wealth within the upper class, and is exploitative of women. So it's all about property. Women are unpaid workers, and that benefits the capitalist system, because if men had to pay their wives to do the work in the household, the capitalists would have to pay higher wages that would reduce the profits for the rich. Women are a reserve army of labour. They can be cheaply hired and easily fired because they are seen as belonging in the home. This enables the employer and the owners to keep wages low and profits high, because if the woman was not available as a second-class worker, then workers would be able to go on strike and fight for higher wages. But since women can be hired, the rich can avoid this. So it's to do with wages and profits. The neo-Marxist view, okay, this is Louis Althusser here. The neo-Marxist view goes beyond the economic explanation given by the Marxists. In the 1960s, the neo-Marxists started to develop the views about exploitation and capitalism. They were influenced by the idea of property ownership in a Marxist perspective, but they add the idea of not only economic factors in inequality, but also social and cultural factors in inequality. So economic, cultural and social factors in inequality. And they look at the common interests of disempowered groups, husbands and wives, parents and children, anyone in the family is exploited regardless of their position because of capitalism. And so we need to look at the way in which gender, patriarchy all serve capitalism. Because of the culture of patriarchy, the social status of women compared to men in terms of being their wife. This is important, and it's been developed by Marxist feminists. Talk about women and men having different roles because of capitalism. Theodor Adorno talks about narcissism and the way in which we develop self-serving attitudes with the decline of the authoritarian family. So it's the idea that we tend to become selfish and inward. So capitalism is really responsible for people's selfishness because of their division and alienation from each other under capitalism. this reflects the changes in society where there was increasing affluence and consumption, which came to be part of our identities more than our occupation. But Adorno is still critical of this, because although some people think this gives us more freedom to consume, Adorno is saying that it becomes a selfish act to consume, rather than providing and working together, we are selfishly consuming as individuals. And this is found in the family, where we are consuming the products of capitalism, and that builds their profits as well. The culture industry, the way in which we reproduce our culture in the media, in the family, religion, any aspect of society can be seen as reproducing the culture of capitalism and patriarchy and monogamy, and emphasising behaviour and identities that fit within a norm, which again promotes gender inequality. It promotes division and alienation and separation from each other. It creates false desires. We become obsessed with products and material objects as a source of identity. We become selfish, we become greedy, we become avaricious. We keep things to ourselves, avarice. And those false desires are seen as giving us happiness, but it's a hedonic treadmill. We're constantly trying to reach pleasure and increase pleasure, so the pursuit of pleasure never ends, but it's a treadmill. We'll just stay on that treadmill forever if we're stuck in that way of living. Hedonism, pursuit of pleasure. So, commodity fetishism, a pursuit of commodities, objects, products, to give identity, to give a sense of status, pleasure. But again, this is this bears no fruit. This path bears no fruit. We think that it will give us happiness, but in fact, it's a never-ending story or struggle for happiness. If we think that the external world and material resources and objects will give happiness, we're ignoring what is within, which Marxists would say in human nature we find benevolence. So it's actually, as Hegel would say, we have projected human qualities of wisdom, benevolence or loving kindness onto our image of God. But that means we conceal from ourselves what is natural to human nature, which is consciousness, intelligence, universal consciousness. How can we criticise the Marxist view of gender inequality? We could say that they underplay patriarchy because they foreground or emphasise class. And this can be seen as ignoring how patriarchy is an independent factor. The radical feminists would say patriarchy is independent of class. Some radical feminists would argue patriarchy predates capitalism, and therefore men are driven to dominate women. And Marxists ignore this because they focus on class. Macro and micro. You could say that the structure of society is overemphasised by especially the traditional Marxists, which underplays micro-scale or small-scale interactions, labelling processes, stereotyping, definitions and interpretations held by individuals, which is shaped through interaction. So the interactionists and social action theorists would emphasise that. The postmodernists would say it's a combination of macro-micro structure action to explain a complex matter of gender inequality, because humans self-organise, but they're also connected to groups. There's little evidence for a conspiracy by the rich to create a nuclear family ideology. People like Engels, such thinkers argue that monogamous marriage is part of the ideology or belief system of capitalism to keep property with the rich, but there's little evidence historically of this process. There's not evidence of primitive communism. This view ignores changes. The family has undergone changes, the workplace is more feminised. Postmodernists would emphasise change and increasing choice rather than barriers and constraints. This brings us to the Weberian view. So if you have any questions, send me an email, daniel_butcher@hotmail.co.uk.